is it correct, as reported in one paper, that Mr. Selwyn Lloyd would like, in fact, to give up the job of Foreign Secretary?
Not at all, except in the sense that everybody would like to give up these appalling burdens which we try and carry.
Would you like to give up yours?
In a sense, yes, because they are very heavy burdens. But of course, nobody can pretend that it isn't. We've gone into this game, we try and do our best, and it's both, in a sense, our pleasure and certainly, I hope, our duty.
Tell the people. Tell them on television. Questions in the public mind, answered by people in the public eye. Robin Day puts the questions.
Good evening. A few minutes ago, the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Harold Macmillan, came to Television House, and he's here now in the ITN studio. It's just over a year since Mr. Macmillan became Prime Minister. Before that, he'd been Chancellor of the Exchequer, Foreign Secretary, Minister of Defence and Minister of Housing. And in pre-war days, he was a very rebellious Conservative backbencher. And when not fully occupied with politics, his profession has been that of a publisher. And perhaps the most famous book handled by his family firm, first published as long ago as 1865, was Alice in Wonderland. Now, Prime Minister, we've read in numerous newspapers that you've come back with a new personality from your Commonwealth tour, that instead of the dignified and reserved Mr. Macmillan, there's a new backslapping was one word I saw, barnstorming Mr. Macmillan. Are you conscious of any change of that nature?
Oh, I don't think very much, but, you know, one has great opportunities abroad. At home, you're a politician. Abroad, you're a statesman.
Lady Dorothy Macmillan was quoted this morning as saying that she had promised to parcel up a few grandchildren and send them to Australia and New Zealand. Now, would you like to see more immigration yourself?
Well, yes, I would. And of course, the Australians are frightfully keen to get their country filled up as far as possible with British migrants.
Would you like to see it on a very large scale?
But it's been on a pretty big scale, you know. It can't go too fast, but it's very important that there shouldn't be misfits, that the people should be happy and settle down well. But it will be easier, really, now, because now that Australia is building up her industries, and England, after all, is a great industrial country, it'll be easier because more people will be able to go to towns and industrial work, rather than to the distant countryside.
Now, you've spoken of the tremendous sense of partnership and loyalty that you found on your tour. But is it not a fact that by far the largest country you visited, India, is utterly opposed to the basic principle of British policy, namely the deterrent power of the H-bomb?
No, I think that isn't really so. They're opposed to the H-bomb, certainly. They're opposed to the groupings in NATO and so forth. But on the really basic thing, they're on our side. That's to say, they are bitterly opposed to the communist in every way, and they are trying to defend the parliamentary system, individual freedom, and everything which is part of our tradition.
Could I ask you this, Prime Minister, why does Britain need the H-bomb on its own, duplicating American effort?
Well, there are two reasons for that. First, we made the A-bomb, we were the first to make it, under Attlee's government. Then we made the H-bomb under Churchill's government. And I think it's a good thing that we should have an independent contribution to the deterrent. And I'm rather interested to see that some of the people who don't want to have it are the most hostile to the United States and most anxious that our policy should not be what they call subservient to the United States.
But if Russia is afraid of anything, it is American power it's afraid of. What difference to the deterrent does our contribution make?
But I think the independent contribution is a help. It gives us a better position in the world, it gives us a better position to the United States, and it puts us where we ought to be, in a position of a great power.
Now, you say it gives us a better position, but can you imagine any situation in which we would use our H-bomb alone?
I hope I can imagine no situation we should have to use it at all. But I say the fact that we are nuclear power helps us with the United States and makes them pay greater regard to our point of view, and that's of great importance in my view.
Could I put it to you in another way? And it's a view held, I think, not only by anti-American people, who say this: what is the use of brandishing this weapon, of having this weapon, which could only mean suicide for this island if it were used?
Well, the object of deterrent is to deter. That's to say that it shouldn't be used. Of course, if it is used, well, then the whole world falls into a terrible state of collapse. The point of it is that it shouldn't be used.
What do you say to those who want Britain to give a moral lead by abandoning bombs?
Well, I can understand those who want to give a moral lead by abandoning all armaments. That seems to be quite logical. I have great respect for that. But I can't see the object of abandoning one form of armament and keeping the others. There's no moral distinction.
And what about the suggestion that for Britain to abandon the bomb would induce other countries, like France, for instance, to make an agreement not to have nuclear weapons?
I don't think that's so at all. I think if we could get what we tried to get in the summer, and we may get again out of summit talks, some general understanding with Russia, America, and ourselves for controlled disarmament, that would have that effect. But for just Britain to drop out now wouldn't have the result you want.
You think the only way to stop other countries getting the bomb, apart from the three who have it at the moment, is a comprehensive scheme?
Yes, which we nearly got in the summer, and I'm not at all without hope of getting.
Well, could I go on to the circumstances in which the government say the bomb might be used? And in the white paper, there's a sentence, the government's white paper on defence, there's a sentence which has caused considerable alarm. It said that if Russia were to launch a major attack on the Western nations, even with conventional forces, they would have to hit back, the Western nations would have to hit back with strategic nuclear weapons. Can you explain that, Prime Minister?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I think it's caused some misunderstanding. Surely it is this. If there's a sudden attack on us by nuclear, on the West must retort by nuclear, the only thing they've got. But if there was a conventional attack, it may take different forms. It may be just crossing the frontier, a few incidents. But of course you wouldn't answer that with a full nuclear reply. But if 200 divisions are mobilized and are marching across Europe, if London is being bombed by bombers with ordinary bombs, if the whole great battle has begun, we must retort. And what we must now do is to make it clear to Russia that we would retort in those circumstances. Otherwise, you're merely inviting an attack.
Don't you think that if the Russians know they're going to be attacked with H-bombs, even if they use conventional forces only, that is a direct encouragement to them to strike with nuclear weapons first?
No, because in the conventional field, we wouldn't have a chance anyway. They've got 200 divisions. What have we got? 20, 30. We might get 40. Surely we've got to distinguish between some frontier incidents, some things which give opportunity for negotiation. And remember that a conventional attack on a great scale can't be done in a moment. It takes 2 or 3 months mobilization. All that becomes known. That's the opportunity for discussion, debate, and hoping to stop it. That's the advantage. But if they were really determined to make an attack on that scale, they must know, and we must let them know, that the West will reply with all the power they have. Otherwise, you're inviting attack.
Now, those arguments are powerful ones, Prime Minister, but the fact remains is that in the recent Rochdale election, leaving aside party labels, 80% of the voters voted for candidates who did not want Britain to have the H-bomb at all. Are you concerned about that?
Yes, I am concerned, because it's very important that the people should understand. Of course, I remember it all so well before the last war. I remember the peace ballot. I remember the curious combination of people, some of whom wanted to stand up to Hitler, and others of whom didn't want to have any arms at all. We've got to teach the people the truth. But I'm equally certain that the way we're proceeding now, try and get the summit talks, try and get controlled disarmament, in conventional as well as in unconventional, is the right way of approach.
Don't you think there is a valid distinction, to go back to a point you made a moment or two ago, between the extreme nuclear weapon and ordinary weapons? Don't you think there is an argument which people...
There is, of course, a distinction. But, of course, don't let anybody think that conventional war was very pleasant. We had 360,000 men killed in the Passchendaele battles.
But they weren't defenseless civilians, were they?
Well, the people of this country, I saw it twice in my life. I wouldn't like to send 5 divisions against 200 Russian ones.
Could I go on to the question of summit talks, Prime Minister? You've said that you want them, and you want them to be successful. Don't you think it would be a good idea to have a general election first, so that the Prime Minister who goes to the summit is sure that he has a solid majority of the British people behind him?
Well, then I don't think that's at all a good idea. I think the first thing to do is to get the summit talks. And the date of a general election might not happen to coincide with the summit talks. We might get the summit talks a good deal earlier.
Do you expect summit talks this year?
I hope so.
How do you feel, Prime Minister, about criticism which has been made in the last few days, in conservative newspapers particularly, of Mr. Selwyn Lloyd, the Foreign Secretary?
Well, I think Mr. Selwyn Lloyd is a very good Foreign Secretary and has done his work extremely well. If I didn't think so, I would have made a change. I do not intend to make a change simply as a result of pressure. I don't believe that that is wise, and it's not in accordance with my idea of loyalty.
Is it correct, as reported in one paper, that he would like, in fact, to give up the job of Foreign Secretary?
Not at all, except in the sense that everybody would like to give up these appalling burdens which we try and carry.
Would you like to give up yours?
In a sense, yes, because they are very heavy burdens. But of course, nobody can pretend that it isn't. We've gone into this game, we try and do our best, and it's both, in a sense, our pleasure and certainly, I hope, our duty.
Prime Minister, could I turn to another point on the subject of unemployment? You felt very strongly about unemployment in pre-war years, didn't you?
Certainly.
And you remember probably saying in the 1930s, when you were round about my age, that Mr. Baldwin's government was a line of disused slag heaps which might well be tidied up. Can I ask you this? Are you happy about the Cohen report on wages and prices, which says that more unemployment may be necessary if our economy is to work properly?
I didn't write the Cohen report, and I'm not responsible for it. But I do want to draw a distinction between the sort of unemployment that I saw at Stockton. You had half the population out of a job, 3 million men at one time, and what we now have, which is, I think, 1.8. And what I think Mr. Gateskill said was the sort of tolerable figure, as high as 3%. I wouldn't like that either. But there's a distinction. There must be some changes of employment, there must be changes of industrial work and so on, but anything like mass unemployment would be absolutely tragic and fatal.
But are you as Prime Minister willing to see unemployment a deliberate instrument of policy to make the economy work? That's what the trade unions are worried about.
Of course, and I don't think it should be a deliberate instrument. On the other hand, they know, and so do the trade unions as well as us, that inflation and what is called over-full employment, 5 jobs for every 3 men, is equally bad. It's bad for discipline, bad for the trade unions, and what we want is a balance. Exactly what that balance should be and how. But there'll always be movement in and out. That must be so.
Finally, Prime Minister, what do you say to the growing number of people who see the two main political parties simply as Tweedledum and Tweedledee?
Oh, I think you've been reading Alice, even after nearly 100 years. Of course there's a feeling, because we've had a good many troubles since the war. See 2 great parties, each struggling with them. And therefore it's fairly easy to come along as a third party and say all sorts of programs. There's bound to be that feeling. I don't think the way to cure it, from our point of view, is to do anything, is to try accept this, to try and do our job decently and honourably. And when the time comes, go to the people on our performance, and based on our performance, on our hopes that we can give for the next period. That's the straightforward thing.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. There'll be another edition of Tell the People next week at this time.